lesson last week of 1 through 16. Even though we're starting 17, I want to back up a little bit and look at 16 in a little bit more detail than I did in the review last week. So, does anybody remember why Paul had to leave Philippi? Do you remember what it was? Remember there was a girl following him around? Yeah. The girl was possessed by a demon, and she was following Paul around and saying they're proclaiming, Jesus the Lord. And it upset the owners of this girl, and they started, went to the city magistrate, had him arrested. Yeah. So I want to look a little bit more about the city so we understand this a little bit more. So Philippi was a little town, and when Philip II conquered it, and do we know who Philip II is? Philip II is the father of Alexander the Great. So they named the city after him, or he named it after himself. The reason it was an important city is it was a major gold center in the mountain that was near. So, matter of fact, they made a mint in the city to make coins, and it was a strategic place along the road that would become Via Egnatia. It was between a marsh and the mountains, and they could block passage along it. So, even though it wasn't a major city, it was still an important city. Controlled an area around 700,000 miles. It was made a Roman colony by Augustus and Mark Antony after a famous battle there, the Battle of Philippi. After Octavian Brutus stabbed Julius Caesar, there was a civil war in Rome. And this is the place where Anthony and Octavia beat them. And the reason Philippi is a colony is because after the battle, they released a bunch of soldiers to live there, and they gave them land. And remember I told you Philippi was kind of modeled on a small version of Rome. They divided it up the same way they did Rome. And that was in 42 BC. So being a colony has certain rights, self-government, and if you notice the last one down there, exempt from scourging, freedom from arrest, right of appeal to the emperor. So what happened to Paul? He's arrested, and he and Silas are beaten, and they're put in jail. Now, they're Roman citizens, okay? And they're living in a city that's a Roman colony where soldiers retired. So you wonder, well, why was the governor of the city so upset and tried to hush Paul up and get him to leave? It's because he would have been killed, or if they didn't keep a few people accountable. I'll give you an example. I'll try not to sidetrack too far. It's going to sound like it. I've been watching YouTube at night when I try to go to sleep. I put these long programs on, and they just like chain together. And somehow over the last few weeks, I've been watching all these World War II documentaries. They even say to sleep by, So a week ago, I saw the movie Midway. It came up on one of my streaming, and I watched the movie Midway. And it was an interesting thing in there. After Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, we were very close to destroyed on the west coast in the Pacific. We had 2 aircraft carriers that were luckily not in port. So we, in retaliation, loaded up a bunch of Army bombers onto the aircraft carriers, and they were going to sail as close as they could to Japan and bomb Tokyo. Now, they couldn't get close enough. The plan was bomb Tokyo, land in China, and come back. They couldn't get close enough, so the bombers weren't going to make it, but they all went anyways. They bombed Tokyo, and their planes ran out of gas over the Sea of China, or the edge of China, and they bailed out. They got on land, and they talked to the Chinese people who were at war with Japan also. And the villagers helped them get returned to America. As a consequence, at the end of the movie, when it tells the real facts about this, China, in retaliation for the villagers helping the Americans get back, killed 250,000 Chinese civilians. Retaliation. So here's America with just 2 aircraft carriers. They missed them at Pearl Harbor. They went and found us, and they destroyed one more. We're down to 1 aircraft carrier. Had they destroyed both of our aircraft carriers, there would have been nothing to stop them from putting the big Yamato and all their battleships off the coast and bombing our coastal cities. And we may have lost some cities. They may have actually infiltrated the United States for a while. Now, Japan knew they couldn't win a long war, but they could maybe knock us out in a short war. We were going to win eventually. We would, even if they'd have come offshore, they don't know the American mentality. They would have been kicked out. But had they taken area and they had Japanese troops in our cities, and one of our citizens attacked them, we saw what they did in China. They would have wiped them out. Now, this is the same mentality that Rome had. Their citizens were protected no matter where they were in the world. So if Roman citizens, even in a Roman colony, get attacked, Rome retaliates, because that's how they keep the safety of all their people throughout the nation. It was called Pax Romana, part of the great peace that took place. They eliminated pirates in the Med, they eliminated bandits on trade routes, because nobody was willing to suffer the wrath of the Romans. So we understand now why this man was so nervous about the fact that he had beaten a Roman citizen. And this is going to play into a couple different scenarios. We're going to see Thessalonica, and in chapter 19 we're going to see Ephesus, and we're going to see why knowing what type of place is explains some of the reactions we see in the New Testament. So, this is talking about the girl now. Following after Paul and us, she kept crying out, "These men are bondservants of the Most High God, who are proclaiming to you the way of salvation." She continued doing this for many days, but Paul was greatly annoyed and turned and said to the Spirit, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out at that very moment. It's interesting, seeing Paul greatly annoyed. He has such patience in other places in the Bible. So this person following him around must have been very annoying. But that's what kicked off this whole incident. After he's put in prison and beaten, and the earthquake comes and releases him, and he baptizes the Philippian jailer, they come to him and say, "You can go, you can leave." And he says, "They have beaten us in public without trial, men who are Romans, and have thrown us into prison, and now they are sending us away secretly. No, indeed. But let them come themselves and bring us out." So here's Paul being bold in the fact that they had beaten him. So that gives us a little bit more information now as we go into the next part of the journey. So the key events of chapter 17 are the church of Thessalonica established, the Bereans more noble-minded, and Paul's sermon on Mars Hill. We will not get all of that. Like I said, I have like 95 slides at least in this lesson, so we'll see how far we can get. So you can see, I put it there, that from where they began, we're up there at Philippi right now at the start of this chapter. So arriving at Thessalonica. Now, when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica. So you can see the path that they were taking, and those are all a day or so apart in walking, depending on how much they walked. It would take us a couple days, because we can't walk 3 miles an hour for 10 hours a day, but that was generally accepted that you could walk about 30 miles in a day. If you look at all the up and down the California coast, all the missions are about 30 miles apart. They're all a day's walk apart. So that's kind of how places were set up. So they came to Thessalonica. So we can see them progressing here. So that brings us to the city of Thessalonica. So this is a modern picture of Thessalonica. It's a port city. It was a main port city of that area. Made Providence capital of Macedonia in 148 BC. So about the same time that other stuff was happening, the capital of that area was at a different place, and it became Thessalonica. Declared a free city in 42 BC. That was following some other battles, and again with a free city. Now this is not a colony; it's a free city, but it gives them several liberties. They don't have to pay taxes as many taxes. And they have some freedoms. About 200,000 people. That might be a little high. I've been researching what larger cities are. It had a large Jewish population, and you notice that almost everywhere that Paul went, he's going to places where there are Jewish communities. He's hitting the main places. Like he didn't say he stopped at those other two places. Thessalonica, though not one of the largest, is next to one of the largest areas in here. It is the largest area in Macedonia. And it had the chief synagogue of the region. So this is where Jews of the region would have been at. It was a crossroad of two Roman highways. This is Via Ignatia went through there, and we'll look at that again some more. That was the big Roman highway that went from one edge of Macedonia all the way up into the other edge, and that's how you cross it. So it gets real close to Italy with a small boat ride, and real close to Asia with a small boat ride. So now when they had traveled through Amphibius and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And according to Paul's customs, he went to them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scripture. This is what we always see Paul do. He always, and I mean it's mentioned time after time after time, that he would start in the synagogues. Much like Dion was talking about this morning, he didn't, set up on a corner somewhere. He went to where there were people he could convert who were interested in God. He started with people who at least believed with God. And there he was explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus who I am proclaiming to you is the Christ." We've talked before, and John did it a number of years ago, doing a lesson on Christ using only the Old Testament, which is what they would have been doing at that time. And I would have loved to hear some of Paul's, translated in English, lessons to see how they did it, how it was done. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, along with a large number of the God-fearing Greeks and a number of leading women. So it makes it sound like he converted some, but more Greeks than the Jews there. So this comes to our first question. What did Paul do for 3 Sabbaths in Thessalonica? And we don't have Dion, so you guys are going to have to talk more.
He went to the synagogues.
And did what?
And preached the gospel.
Yeah. Like I said, I wish we had more accounts of the preaching they did. Because even when we do have a small account of the preaching, like in Acts 2, we have just a few sentences of Peter's, and then he reasoned with them for a long time. So you hear that they're much more detailed than the brief Reader's Digest recap we get. Whoops, turned it off. So the next section is verses 5 through 9, the trouble at Thessalonica. But the Jews, becoming jealous and taking along some wicked men from the marketplace, formed a mob and set the city in an uproar. And attacking the house of Jason, they were seeking to bring them out to the people. And we assume that the them there is Paul and Silas. When they did not find them, they began dragging Jason and some brethren before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have upset the world have come here also, and Jason has welcomed them, and they all act contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." They stirred up the crowds and the city authorities who heard these things. And when they had received a pledge from Jason and the others, they released them. So why did the city turn against them?
Preaching another king.
Well, he'd been doing that for 3 weeks. So is it really the fact that he was doing that? It's more that they were stirred up. They would have been fine on their own, but we have the Jews that see,
That is a threat.
yeah, here he comes in, and in 3 weeks he's drawing members away from his church, the Jewish synagogues, and he's gathering other God-fearing Gentiles, and he's taking away the people that make them important. If you're, whatever they were in the synagogues, you're losing people, and you get upset. This guy's coming in, he's teaching people. So they got upset, and did they have valid charges against him? Do we see that they said they were doing this and this and this, and those things were true? And not really. They said they upset the world. Now, how had the world been upset? And was this true? It says they brought false claims against them. And we talked about this a little bit. I think we got just about this far 5 months ago. And we talked about the claims they made that they were preaching another king and they upset the world were not really true at that time. But in reality they were, or would become so. Eddie?
They upset Diablo.
Yeah, they turned
not
up.
the world, but Diablo. And Paul, of all persons, should realize that you can practically take Stephen's lesson or sermon and paste it, cut and copy and paste it here.
Yeah.
They don't need a reason.
The no single thing has changed the world more than the name Jesus. So there will be a point where Christianity upsets the whole world. So this will be a charge that will be true in that they upset the way things were then. Now, not that preaching Christ was in the slightest wrong. We're meant to follow what God tells us to do, but we're upset the way that things were. The false claims that Jesus was a king, they weren't preaching that he was replacing the Caesar. They're talking about a spiritual king. So although these claims are false, there is a way you can look at it where what they're telling is the truth. That doesn't release from the fact that what they were using them in false terms to stir up the world. So the question is, why did the city turn against them? And that's closely based on the fact that they were lied to. They said that if these people were truly preaching against Caesar and were allowed to, that city could be held liable for allowing this. The fact that he stirred up the city here, and this is just a free city, not a colony, could have consequences against them too. So why did the city turn against them? How did the Christians upset the world? And how does this happen today? We talked about this some 5 months ago, how the same thing is, should we be upsetting the world with the teachings of Christ? And yeah, absolutely. We see the way modern society, I won't even say our government or any government, is modern society in the whole world is turning away from God. So Christianity should be trying to upset the world and get them back on track. So after that all happens, we're going to end up at Berea. So I'll give you a brief thing of Berea here too. So it says they immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. So where is Berea? It is this little city over here. It's not a main city like Philippi or Thessalonica, but it's still a pretty big city. You can see here's a different kind of picture of it. It sits at the foothill of the Vermian Mountains. It's been there for since 1000 BC. Became prominent about in the 4th century BC. And some of it says it was the second most important city in Macedonia, not in size or anything, but because the Romans used it as a place of worship. So there were a lot of Roman-centered religious places at Berea, and a Roman emperor retired there, and so it was built up with lots of extra fortifications and the racetracks and the forums and all that stuff. So it was still considered a fairly important area, and Paul picks it and goes there because it also had a large Jewish population there. So the brethren immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea, and when they arrived, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. So that looks like it was about a 2 days travel away. And again, when he arrives, where does he go first? He goes to the synagogue. Now these were more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word with great eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see whether these things were so. So Paul is meeting with the people there, and they're open to the word. They're not automatically closed. They didn't have leadership that immediately got jealous, because Paul's teaching them what? He's preaching what? The Christ. Okay. They had been waiting for hundreds and hundreds of years for the Christ. So if somebody says, hey, let me tell you about him, you would think you'd at least listen. You'd think you'd at least listen. And these people did. And they studied the word to see. They didn't just believe what Paul was saying. They studied to see if it was true. Therefore, because of that, they were willing and open to it. Many, unlike a few at Thessalonica, Many of them believed, along with a number of prominent Greek women and men. So it had much more acceptance there. But when the Jews of Thessalonica found out that the word of God had been proclaimed by Paul in Berea, also they came there as well, agitating and stirring up the crowds. So, and we've talked to this in the past, how we always seem to hear that there's people that can go out there and they could stir up the crowd. And it's, I don't know, they didn't have Saturday night football or Sunday night football, or they didn't have TV or something. The crowds seem to be easily agitated. We do see similar things across America in politics, but we're not all in one place. We're spread out, so it doesn't have that effect that you see somebody raising a mob up. It's a little different, but again and again and again, we see Thessalonica here, Ephesus, and many other places where we see they stoned Paul and left him for dead because the crowd was stirred up. So time and time again, somebody raises a mob up and goes after Paul. It says, then immediately, as soon as this uprising started, they were probably aware what had just happened in Thessalonica. So immediately, the brothers sent Paul out to go as far as the sea, and Silas and Timothy remained there. It doesn't tell us, we're sort of losing track of Luke in here, because he wrote this. He doesn't say anything about himself, but we know that he is along with this group of people from Troas. He joined them, and so Luke is with them, but they leave at least Timothy and Silas here in Berea, and they send Paul away. It says, I do not want you to be, I wanted to talk about this. As Paul was coming across Asia, remember he wanted to go down into Asia, where Ephesus and all those places are, and the Spirit said no. Then he wanted to go Bethany up there at the top, and the Spirit said no. He had the vision to go into Macedonia. And he's in Berea now, and there are many that speculate that this may have been Paul's thought, that he wanted to go to Rome. And he's going along with Via Ignatia right now. He went from Philippi to Thessalonica, and the Via Ignatia goes through Berea and goes straight across the country, and it comes out right across from Rome. So if you remember in Romans, he says, I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I have among the other Gentiles. Where are my... So, I'm going to jump past and we'll go back, because you can see where Berea is up there at the top. And you can see where Jerusalem is down here at the bottom. And you see this long path that he's gone. And he didn't go up to Bithynia. He didn't go into Asia. He came across to Macedonia. And he's here. And the thought that why Paul may have considered going to Rome at that point was how close they are actually to Rome. You can see where Thessalonica is, and just across that short piece of land there onto the boot of Italy, and then you take the Via Appia, and that would bring you to Rome. He's closer to Rome now at this point than he is to going back home. in my mind, I always thought Rome was still so far away. But Rome is closer right there. So the thought that on several trips he thought to go there, this would have been one of his several trips. Because he only has, the 2, the 3, the 3rd missionary journey, and then he goes to Rome, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. So this is most likely, at this point, he was probably planning on going to Rome. When we just read these, and even when we see little maps, we don't get a good idea of size. So I said, I want to put a map of the U.S. next to this and see if it can give us a better idea how far these things apart. The whole Mediterranean, the whole Roman Empire fits inside the United States. So you can see where Italy is, and over there where it says Greece, across from it says Bulgaria. That's how far he is, just like a 2-state drive away from Rome. Here's the actual Roman Empire imposed over the U.S. So land-wise, it's smaller than the United States. We have this picture in our mind of this giant empire of the Romans. And we don't think that, no, it's actually, the world has shrunk in modern times, right? So things don't seem as far away. Well, the speed of travel, it really has shrunk. But that's the whole Roman Empire at the very height of its expansion. So if that helps you put it in mind a little bit, how close he actually was to Rome, that his intent might have been to go to Rome, and then again the Thessalonians get in his way. But we got to go back a little bit. So I think, yeah. So the questions were, in what way were the Bereans more noble-minded?
More accepting.
Or accepting?
Didn't they want to learn more? They were in more of a mindset of not shutting it out. But okay, show us, prove to us.
Exactly. They were what we call willing to learn. Correct?
And they searched out the things that they were being told to make sure that it was the truth.
Yeah, they just weren't, sometimes we use the word open-minded. Some people don't like that. I like the term open-minded, willing to accept new ideas, but not soft-minded. They accept everything they heard. They still made sure it's what God was saying. Eddie?
I would use the word more civil. Like you mentioned, that there are 2 reactions to Paul's personal testimony, especially to Paul, because since it happened to him that he was directly appointed by Jesus Christ, so he has a story to tell. So when the person has this kind of personal experience, and then you share with people, some will be more civil-minded in listening to your personal experience, your testimony, so to say. But knowing your background as a Pharisees, the other side will be more militant. I would say civility, military. They're more militant. They say you are a traitor.
Yeah.
You give up your forefathers' belief. So those in Thessalonica, they are militant. They use violence. So whereas the Bereans are more civil. They'll sit down and discuss and here you are.
And it's it has more to do with a couple of factors. They were more godly. They didn't put their own interest above God's interest. When we see Thessalonica, and we see the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the priest, what are they putting as forward as they're putting their own personal interest? What have I got to lose if we listen to this guy? Ahead of the truth. So their personal interests are more important than the truth. The Bereans seem to be more interested in the truth and what God said about it. So they saw, let's search it out. Is it the truth? Let's follow it if it is the truth. And they did. And so you're right, but basically the encounters we see with Paul, they either are very upset at him or accept him. We don't see a lot of that lukewarm reaction, but that may have just been the case of the writing of the results of what Paul does. Paul may have talked to many people who just turned their backs and walked away and didn't care. So the Bereans, though, called noble-minded here, they didn't put their own interests first. And I don't know if that's what noble-minded means, but isn't that what we're supposed to do?
And maybe we stumble upon the answer why the New Testament was written in Greek. Because Hebrew is too violent. Greek is very civil-minded. So we have it in Greek. So.
That and a lot more people spoke Greek. I think some of it was written in, not every bit of it was written in Greek originally. I think some of it was written in Aramaic, but I'm not sure. That comes to question number 5. What did some of the Jews from Thessalonica do when they heard Paul was preaching in Berea?
Get more militant to go after them.
Yeah, why though? They're not preaching or upsetting Thessalonica. Why would they go a whole day? It's like we hear something we didn't like. Somebody visiting preacher came here and we didn't like what he had to say. We need you to go. And then we hear he's preaching up in San Francisco.
Servants of the devil.
Yeah, that could be part of it. They're not doing God's will, so if you're not doing God's will, whose will are you doing? Is part of it. They could have been just that angry. There are some people who, once they don't like you, they have a revenge mentality, and they're going to get you no matter what you do. And it could be, maybe they thought what they were doing was right, and they didn't want to see it anywhere else happen. We don't know. Eddie?
And strangely enough, to today, such mentality and behavior still persists. I was mentioning this morning about brethren in Malaysia. They go after missionaries or preachers who is holding gospel meeting, who has his educational background from Evelyn Christian College. They will come up in arms and contest and protest that in the product of Evelyn Christian College now is here conducting a gospel meeting. They are against it. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I think that's the case of the third thing I said. I think they thought they're doing right. You can be misguided and overzealous and be working against God. We think back to Peter standing before the Sanhedrin and Gamaliel saying, settle down, don't, fly off the handle and kill these people or something, because you might end up fighting against God. So his advice was really timely then, and it's timely now. These people that you're speaking of, they should be careful that they're not working against God's interests. They should make sure what they're doing is right, because you can do great harm thinking that you're on the right side of the problem when you're not.
But the thing is, they could be like the Berean, be more noble-minded and say, okay, we come and hear you speak, and then after that we want to have a meeting with you.
Yeah.
Then we can talk and discuss. That would be more noble-minded, right? Instead of standing at the door or the gate, shouting and screaming.
Have people changed? Nothing's new. People haven't changed. So we see the same things we see in the Old Testament, same things we see in the New Testament, same things we see today. People's own self-interest. That we see the same problems Nothing new under the sun. So yes, we have people doing all these things these days. So, but I agree with you. They should be more brand-minded, as should we at all times. So, it said, then immediately the brethren sent Paul out to go as far as the sea, and Silas and Timothy remained there. So, and then this is where I showed you already, so we'll get past this. So we're going to end tonight, but we'll take up next lesson at verse 15, and we'll talk about Paul when he gets to Athens and his Mars Hill speech, as they call it. And there's some interesting things there too, as there always is. All right, I'm going to let Brad come up and sing a few songs. Brad, let me get back there and put the slides up, and go ahead.
Is this screen gonna work?
Oh, it's not on? Oh. It should be on. Should be up there, it's not?
That's okay, I'll
Yeah, just use the book.
454, let the beauty of Jesus be seen. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me, all his wonderful passion and purity. May his spirit divine all my being refine. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. When somebody has been so unkind to you, some word spoken that pierces you through and through, think how he was beguiled, spat upon and reviled. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. From the dawn of the morning to close of day, in example, in deeds, and in all you say, lay your gifts at his feet, ever strive to keep sweet. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. Number 355. This song, if you don't recall, I'll refresh your memory, is sung with the same tune as the breaking of bread. Break thou the bread of life, dear Lord, to me, as thou didst break the Give me to eat and live with thee above. Teach me to love thy